I never thought I'd become the neighborhood villain. Yet here I was, standing in my driveway at 7:32 a.m. on a Tuesday, watching absolute chaos unfold. 3 police cars with lights flashing, a dozen neighbors in bathrobes and pajamas covering their ears, and front and center, Karen Winters, HOA president extraordinaire, her perfectly highlighted bob quivering with rage as she screamed about property values while pointing at my garage. The source of the neighborhood meltdown? The massive vintage Firehouse siren mounted above my garage door that had just blasted at a skull-rattling 130 decibels for exactly 8 seconds. "You are finished in this community!" Karen shrieked, her voice hoarse from trying to out-yell the lingering echo of the siren. "This is harassment! Domestic terrorism!" Behind me, I felt a tug on my sleeve. My niece Lucy stood there, her eyes wide, but her mouth twisted into an unmistakable smirk. She signed quickly. "Worth it?" I nodded and signed back. "Totally worth it." Officer Rodriguez approached, fighting to keep his professional face on. I'd known him for years through emergency calls at the Firehouse. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, I'm going to need you to explain what happened here." "Of course, officer," I said, my voice the definition of innocence. "I was just testing my historical display. There must have been some kind of malfunction." And that's when Karen completely lost it. Honestly, I couldn't blame her. After all, I'd engineered this entire disaster. But to understand how a 42-year-old firefighter with a spotless record ended up at war with his HOA, we need to go back 3 months. "What do you mean I need permission to install alarm lights?" I asked, leaning forward in the uncomfortable folding chair. I was attending my first Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association meeting, and already regretting every life decision that had led me here. Karen Winters smiled the way a shark might smile at a wounded seal. "Mr. Callahan, every exterior modification requires board approval. It's in the covenant you signed when you took ownership of your parents' house. There's safety lights connected to the smoke detectors. My niece is deaf. She's coming to live with me while my brother and his wife are overseas for work." Karen tapped her French manicured nails on the table. "That's a very touching story, but rules are rules. You'll need to submit the proper application forms, including mock-ups, technical specifications, and a statement of aesthetic integration." I looked around the room at the other board members, searching for any sign of humanity. Most avoided eye contact, except for Bill Henderson, who gave me an apologetic shrug. "My niece arrives in 2 weeks. How long does the approval process take?" Karen's smile widened. "Applications are reviewed at our monthly meetings, but since today's meeting is already in progress, you'll need to wait until next month." I did the math in my head. That's after she moves in. This is a safety issue. "Perhaps you should have planned ahead," Karen said dismissively. Now, moving on to the Nielsen's request to repaint their front door. I sat through the rest of the meeting in a daze, listening to heated debates about garden gnome height restrictions and appropriate mailbox colors. By the time I left, I was certain I'd entered some bizarre parallel dimension where common sense went to die. "I don't understand the problem," my brother Jake said over the phone that night. "They're just lights that flash when the alarm goes off. It's not like you're putting up a neon sign." I sighed, stretching out on my couch. The house still felt like my parents' place, not mine. Dad had passed 3 years ago, Mom just last year. I'd inherited the house, but kept my downtown apartment near the Firehouse, renting this place out until recently. Now I was discovering the joys of suburban living. Apparently, in HOA land, safety takes a back seat to whether something matches the neighborhood aesthetic. Jesus. Well, Lucy needs those alarms, Mike. She's independent as hell, but she can't hear smoke detectors. What about her room? Can't you at least set something up inside? Already ordered the bed shakers and strobe lights for indoors, but the exterior system connects everything. If there's a fire when she's in the backyard or garage, she needs to know. Jake was quiet for a moment. She's looking forward to staying with you, you know? Talks about her cool firefighter uncle all the time. Great, another layer of pressure. I'll figure it out, I promise. After hanging up, I spent hours researching ADA regulations and HOA laws. Turns out homeowners associations have disturbing amounts of power, even when it comes to reasonable accommodations. I could fight it legally, but that would take months we didn't have. I printed out the application forms and began the mind-numbing process of documenting every technical specification for a simple visual alarm system. 2 rejected applications later, the first for incomplete information, the second for aesthetic concerns. I ran into Officer Rodriguez at Denny's. I was nursing my 3rd coffee and staring at my latest rejection letter when he slid into the booth across from me. "You look like a man contemplating arson," he said, waving to the waitress for coffee. I snorted. "Just contemplating how many smoke detectors it would take to deafen my entire neighborhood." "Ah, HOA troubles." He nodded knowingly. "How'd you guess?" "Because nobody looks that defeated unless they've tangled with either the IRS or an HOA president on a power trip." Rodriguez took a sip of his newly arrived coffee. "Let me guess. Karen Winters?" I straightened up. "You know her?" "Everyone in uniform knows Karen. We've got a dedicated phone line just for her calls." He rolled his eyes. Last month she reported a suspicious character who turned out to be the guy delivering her Amazon packages. I filled him in on my situation with Lucy and the alarm system. With each detail, his expression darkened. "That's messed up. Have you looked into the ADA angle?" "Yeah, but I'd need to sue, and Lucy will be here before that gets resolved." He nodded thoughtfully. "Reminds me of that noise complaint case over in Ridgewood last year. Guy kept getting cited for his wind chimes, but they couldn't make it stick because of some technicality about pre-existing structures and historical items." He shrugged. "Not that I'm suggesting anything." I suddenly found myself very interested in this case. "Really? What kind of technicality?" Rodriguez glanced at his watch. "Gotta run, but hypothetically, if something was already installed before certain bylaws were enacted, or if it qualified as a historical display item rather than a modification." He threw some cash on the table. "Just remember, I never said anything." Lucy arrived the following Saturday. I'd only seen her a few times a year at family gatherings, and she'd grown from a gangly kid into a poised teenager. Her dark hair was cut in a stylish bob with purple tips, and she had our family's characteristic stubborn chin. When she stepped off the plane, she immediately dropped her bags and signed rapidly. I caught maybe every 3rd word. My ASL was still a work in progress. Seeing my confusion, she slowed down, and I understood. "Did you get the alarm lights fixed?" I forced a smile and signed back, my movements clumsy but clear enough. "Working on it. Inside alarms ready." Her face fell just slightly before she masked it with a smile. She grabbed her bags and headed toward baggage claim without waiting for me. That night I was awakened at 2 a.m. by Lucy shaking my shoulder, her face pale. She pointed toward the hallway where the smoke detector was chirping, its battery dying. A sound she couldn't hear, but had somehow sensed. I realized in that moment that this wasn't about winning against Karen. It was about Lucy's safety and dignity. I had to find a solution, HOA be damned. "You want to what?" Bill Henderson asked, nearly choking on his beer. We were in his garage, allegedly discussing lawn care techniques, but actually hiding from Karen's Sunday neighborhood patrol. "I want you to bring up my case at the next meeting. They like you. You're on the board." Bill wiped his mouth. "I'm on the board because I never rock the boat. Karen only tolerates me because my wife does her taxes." "Come on, Bill. You know this is wrong. Lucy needs this system." He sighed, setting down his beer. "Mike, you don't understand. Karen has dirt on everyone. Last year, the Petersons tried to install solar panels. Within a week, suddenly everyone knew about their son's DUI and their underwater mortgage. That's ridiculous. What could she possibly have on me? Bill gave me a level look. You rented this house out for 2 years. You really think all your tenants followed every HOA rule? I felt my stomach sink. You're saying she's been keeping a file on violations? I'm saying Karen doesn't lose, not ever. He took another swig of beer. But fine, I'll bring it up. Just don't get your hopes up. The HOA meeting was going about as well as a dumpster fire. Bill had made a valiant effort, raising my case as a reasonable accommodation for a disabled resident. But Karen had come prepared. While we sympathize with Mr. Callahan's niece, she said, not sounding sympathetic at all, we have to consider the precedent this would set. Next, someone will want wheelchair ramps that don't match the aesthetic, or handrails in unapproved finishes. I couldn't stay silent. You're comparing safety equipment to aesthetics? Karen's eyes narrowed. Mr. Callahan, you're out of order. Only board members may speak during this portion of the meeting. This is ridiculous, I said, standing up. We're talking about a teenager's safety. What we're discussing, Karen said icily, is property values. Your temporary guardianship doesn't justify permanent modifications that affect everyone's investment. Perhaps you should consider more appropriate accommodations for your niece's special needs. The room went silent. I felt a hot rush of anger that I hadn't experienced since my rookie days on the force. Did you seriously just suggest I should send her somewhere else? Because your precious property values matter more than her safety? Karen smiled thinly. I'm simply suggesting that if you can't provide appropriate accommodations within our guidelines, perhaps this isn't the right community for your situation. I was about to launch into a tirade that would probably have ended with me being escorted out, when Bill caught my eye and gave a tiny headshake. I took a deep breath. I'll be submitting another application, I said, my voice tight, with more detailed specifications. We look forward to reviewing it, Karen replied sweetly. In next month's meeting. As I stormed out, I heard her call after me. And Mr. Callahan, any unauthorized modifications will result in daily fines of $200. They can't actually prevent a safety modification for a disabled person, said Anita Sharma, the ADA attorney I'd consulted as a last resort. But fighting it would take time. Time we don't have, I said, pacing her office. Lucy's already had one close call with the toaster. Anita tapped her pen thoughtfully. There's always creative compliance. Meaning? Find a loophole. HOAs are built on technicalities and exceptions. What does your covenant allow without approval? I thought about Rodriguez's comment. Historical displays. Maintenance of existing structures. She smiled. Now you're thinking. Just remember, I never advised you to circumvent the proper channels. Officially, I recommend continued applications through the proper process. Officially, I repeated, returning her smile. You want to put up a what? Tony Delgado asked, squinting at me from under his hard hat. I'd hired him to redo my kitchen 3 months ago, and he was still finding reasons why he couldn't finish the backsplash. A vintage Firehouse siren, as a historical display. We were standing in my garage where I'd laid out my father's collection of firefighting memorabilia. The centerpiece was a massive 1950s Federal Signal siren that had once perched atop Station 12, where my dad had worked for 30 years. When they'd modernized the station, he'd somehow convinced them to let him keep it. Tony whistled. That thing's gotta be, 70, 80 pounds? 96, I said. And I need it mounted above the garage, wired to power, but also... I hesitated. Also what? Tony asked, suddenly interested. Hypothetically, if someone wanted this connected to their home alarm system. Tony grinned. Hypothetically, that would be against all sorts of noise ordinances. He ran his hand along the Siren's curved housing. But it'd wake the dead if it went off. Or alert someone who can't hear. Understanding dawned on Tony's face. The deaf niece. This is about her, isn't it? I nodded. Man, those HOA people are real pieces of work, aren't they? He studied the Siren again. I'd need to modify the control circuit, disguise the wiring, and I officially know nothing about any of this. Of course not, I agreed. This is just a historical display, for aesthetics. Tony laughed. Right, aesthetics. He named his price, which was steep but fair for a job requiring selective amnesia. One more thing, I added. It needs to look like it's been there for years, predating the current HOA rules. Tony tapped the side of his nose. Weather aging, strategic rust. I know a guy. Karen's inspection was as unpleasant as expected. She showed up unannounced the day after Tony completed the installation, clipboard in hand and suspicion in her eyes. This was not the application you submitted, she said immediately, glaring at the Siren. I didn't submit an application for this, I countered calmly. This is a historical display honoring my father's service. The covenant clearly states historical items are exempt from the approval process. That exemption is for items like plaques, not, she gestured wildly, industrial noise machines. It's non-functional, I lied smoothly. Just a display piece. The wiring is purely for the decorative light on top. She circled the garage, examining every inch of the installation. Tony had done an amazing job making it look weathered and long established. The wiring disappeared seamlessly into the existing garage infrastructure, and the control panel was disguised as a vintage fire alarm box. This is clearly a new installation, she insisted. Actually, it was installed when my father moved in 28 years ago. It was covered by siding until my recent garage repairs revealed it, and I decided to restore it to honor his memory. This was, of course, complete bullshit. But I'd spent the previous week photoshopping old family photos to show glimpses of the Siren in the background. I'd also had Bill and 2 other longtime neighbors sign affidavits swearing it had always been there. Karen's eyes narrowed. We'll be discussing this at the next board meeting. I look forward to it, I replied pleasantly. By the way, how's the investigation into the Nielsen's non-regulation bird bath going? Her mouth pinched into a tight line before she turned and stalked back to her Mercedes SUV. Score 1 for the firefighter? Lucy had been living with me for 3 weeks, and despite the alarm situation, we'd fallen into a comfortable routine. She was self-sufficient and smart as hell, already planning to major in architectural engineering when she started college next year. We communicated through a mix of my improving ASL, her lip reading, and text messages. In the evenings, she'd patiently correct my signing, usually while rolling her eyes at how slowly I learned. "Why HOA lady so angry?" she signed one night after dinner. I laughed. "Because I'm breaking her rules with the Siren." "Not broke yet," she corrected with a mischievous grin. "When?" "Soon," I promised. "Just waiting for the right moment." She nodded. Then her expression grew serious. "Not want trouble for you." I put my hand on her shoulder. "No trouble. Family first, always." Her smile was worth whatever fine Karen might eventually hit me with. The right moment arrived sooner than expected. I was in the shower when Lucy decided to make breakfast. She'd tried to use the toaster oven, but something went wrong. By the time I smelled smoke and ran downstairs, wrapped in just a towel. The kitchen was hazy with smoke, and Lucy was frantically trying to unplug the flaming appliance. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and dealt with it quickly, occupational habit to keep one in every room, but the smoke detectors were blaring throughout the house. Lights were flashing on the interior system I'd installed, but if Lucy had been outside or in the garage, she'd have had no warning. After we cleaned up and the smoke cleared, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, looking defeated. "I didn't know," she signed, her movements small and ashamed. "Couldn't smell it?" "Not your fault," I signed back emphatically. "Need better alarms." She nodded, then asked, "When will HOA say yes?" I didn't have the heart to tell her they probably never would. Instead, I said, "I have backup plan, trust me?" Her smile was immediate. Always trust firemen. That afternoon, I submitted one final appeal to the HOA with photos of the smoke damage and a heartfelt plea focusing on Lucy's safety. I knew it wouldn't work, but I needed to show I'd exhausted all proper channels before executing my plan. "This is everything we need," I explained to Tony, handing him a bag of electronic components I'd sourced from a firefighter buddy who specialized in alarm systems. "Can you integrate it today?" Tony glanced at the parts, then at me. "You're really doing this, huh?" "Yep." "HOA's gonna crucify you." "Probably." He shrugged. "Your funeral. I'll have it ready by 4. By nightfall, the Siren was fully integrated with our home alarm system, with an additional remote trigger I could activate from my phone. I tested the connections, but not the actual Siren. That would be saved for its grand debut. I let Lucy in on the plan, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. I made sure she had her special earplugs ready. Though she couldn't hear the Siren, she could feel its vibrations, and they would be intense. The next morning I texted Bill, "Is everyone at the 9 a.m. meeting?" His response came at 9:07. "Full house, Karen reviewing violations. Now's your moment." I looked at Lucy, who gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready," she signed back. I opened the app on my phone, took a deep breath, and pressed the button. Which brings us back to my driveway, surrounded by angry neighbors and police cars, with Karen screaming about property values. Officer Rodriguez was trying very hard to look stern. "Mr. Callahan, you understand this is a violation of noise ordinances?" "I do," I said solemnly. "It was just supposed to be a test of the historic equipment for educational purposes." "Lies!" Karen shrieked. "He did this deliberately, during our meeting. This is harassment." Rodriguez turned to her. "Ma'am, please lower your voice." "Don't tell me to lower my voice. This man has been defying HOA regulations for weeks. That Siren is an unauthorized installation." I pulled out my folder of documents. "Actually, I have affidavits from 3 neighbors confirming the Siren has been part of the house for decades. And according to Section 5, Paragraph 3 of the Covenant, historical items predating the current bylaws are exempt from approval requirements." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You falsified those documents. This is fraud." At that moment, my lawyer Anita walked up the driveway, carrying her own folder. Impeccable timing. We'd planned for her to arrive about 15 minutes after the Siren test. "Fraud is a serious accusation, Miss Winters," she said smoothly. "As are violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is what my client has documented in these records of your board, repeatedly denying reasonable accommodations for his deaf niece." Karen stammered. "That has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with this," Anita continued. "My client exhausted all proper channels before being forced to utilize a pre-existing historical fixture to ensure his niece's safety." Bill stepped forward from the crowd. "I can confirm the board received and denied multiple applications for standard visual alarm systems." Other neighbors began murmuring. Mrs. Nguyen from across the street spoke up. "They denied my wheelchair ramp application 3 times before my husband built it anyway, and we paid the fines." "And my request for a temporary access ramp when I broke my leg," added Mr. Jenkins. The flood of complaints seemed to energize Anita. "I'd be very interested in reviewing the HOA's history of accommodation denials. Seems like we might have a class action situation developing." Karen looked around wildly, suddenly realizing she was losing control. This isn't... We have procedures." "Yes," I said quietly. "Procedures that prioritize aesthetics over safety. That ends today." Rodriguez cleared his throat. "About this noise complaint." Anita addressed him directly. "Officer, we'll ensure the siren is only activated in genuine emergencies or during pre-approved testing with proper neighborhood notification." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "See that you do. Now, does anyone need medical attention? No? Then I think we're done here." He turned to Karen. "Unless you want to file a formal complaint, ma'am?" Karen looked between him, Anita, the growing number of disgruntled neighbors, and finally me. Her shoulders sagged slightly. "This isn't over, Callahan," she said, but the threat sounded hollow. By the following week, an emergency HOA board meeting had been called. Karen was conspicuously absent. "Family emergency" was the official explanation, though rumor had it she was consulting with lawyers. The board, now led temporarily by Bill, unanimously approved my application for a proper visual alarm system. Tony had it installed within days, linking all our smoke detectors to exterior strobes that would alert Lucy whether she was in the backyard, garage, or anywhere on the property. The siren remained mounted above the garage, now officially registered as a historical display with the local historical society, complete with a small plaque explaining its significance to the fire department's history. 3 months later, Karen put her house on the market and moved to a downtown condo. By then, my case had inspired several other homeowners to demand reasonable accommodations for various needs, and the HOA had adopted new, more flexible guidelines. A year after the Siren incident, as it came to be known, Lucy's parents returned from their overseas assignment to find her thriving. She'd made friends in the neighborhood, joined the high school swim team, and developed a ridiculously elaborate secret handshake with Rodriguez, who now stopped by regularly for coffee. "You know," my brother said as we watched Lucy showing her mom the vegetable garden she'd started in the backyard, "when we asked you to look after her, I didn't expect you to overthrow a suburban dictatorship in the process." I shrugged. "Just doing what needed to be done." He studied me for a moment. "Mom and Dad would be proud, especially Dad." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "He always did say the best way to fight fire was with a bigger fire." "Speaking of which," Jake nodded toward the garage, "what's with all the decorations on Dad's old siren?" The once plain metal siren was now painted in bright colors and adorned with patterns that Lucy had designed. She'd turned it from an industrial relic into a piece of art. "Lucy's idea," I explained. "She said if it was going to be part of the family, it deserved a makeover." Jake laughed. "Well, it's certainly eye-catching." "That's the point," I said, watching Lucy animatedly signing to her mother about her plans for a fall garden. "Sometimes the loudest statement is standing up for those who can't be heard." As if sensing we were talking about her, Lucy looked over and flashed me a grin before signing quickly. "Best uncle ever." I signed back. "Worth it?" Her response was immediate. "Totally worth it." 6 months later, I was elected to the HOA board. My first proposal? A community-wide disaster preparedness program that included ASL training and accessibility equipment for every block. It passed unanimously. And that vintage siren? It gets tested once a year now, with advance notice to the entire neighborhood, as part of our annual Good Neighbor Day block party. Officer Rodriguez brings the K-9 unit, Tony grills the best carne asada in the county. And for one day, everyone remembers that rules matter, but people matter more. Sometimes you have to make a little noise to make a difference.